The birthday. It was my birthday. Not that I ever cared much for birthdays, but you know how it goes. You get older, and people expect things from you. That you're happy, that you celebrate, that you blow out the candles on your cake with a wish in mind. My wife, Emma, asked me yesterday what I wanted to do. I answered the way I always do, nothing. She looked at me, the way she always does, with that little hint of pity in her eyes. You're supposed to be happy on your birthday, she always says, as if it's some kind of rule. She doesn't get it. Of course, she had it all planned out again. Early in the morning, she stood by my bed with a smile and a few gifts in her hands. I glanced at the wrapping paper. She was so predictable. A book I'd never read, deodorant I probably already had, and a sweater I knew would be the wrong size. She should have known me better, but it didn't seem to matter to her. Always pushing forward, always trying to please, hoping to get something in return that didn't require any effort. "What are you going to do today?" she asked cheerfully, as if it were going to be a celebration. "Nothing," I said. "I'm staying here." She made a face but said nothing. It was her way of accepting it, or maybe secretly hoping I'd change my mind. But I wouldn't. The rest of the day drifted by. I sat on the couch, half watching the news. It was just like any other day. Everyone in town was already at work, and I felt like one of them. The same faces, the same expressions. No one seemed genuinely happy. They all had their tasks, just like me. Emma went out to run errands, as she always did. I was glad to have the house to myself for a bit. The silence was the only thing I truly enjoyed. But that silence wouldn't last. I could feel it coming. At some point, the doorbell rang. I got up and opened the door. There stood Daniel, my brother. My first thought was, what's he doing here? We hadn't spoken in months. Not that I minded, but he'd always lingered in the back of my mind, like a memory I couldn't quite let go of. "Hey, brother," he said with a smile I didn't entirely trust. "Can I come in?" "Sure," I said, stepping aside to hold the door open for him. "What's up?" "I need to talk," he said. There was something in his eyes I couldn't place, like he was hiding something behind his smile. Daniel was always like that, a man who wished he were a little more successful but kept finding himself stuck in the same situations. In the family, he had a reputation for never quite measuring up. He worked as a consultant, but no one really understood what he did. Every time he talked about it, it felt like he was trying to sell himself all over again. We sat down in the living room. Thankfully, Emma was still out. The silence I'd cherished earlier now felt different. Daniel didn't start talking right away, which wasn't like him. Usually, he launched into some story about his work or his latest adventure with his wife, or complained about one of his kids doing something he didn't approve of. But today was different. "I need to tell you something," he finally said. His voice wavered a little, and I could tell he was uncomfortable. "I've made a decision," he said. He looked at me, but his eyes quickly darted away, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "What is it?" I asked. I wasn't curious, but you know how it goes. The moment demands it. "I'm going back to my ex." There was a pause. It felt like a slap in the face, but I said nothing. Of course, I should have seen this coming. Daniel was always so fickle in his relationships. He'd broken things off with her before, only to take her back, always promising that things would be different this time. "I know you don't think it's a good idea," he continued, "but I've really changed. I've found myself." I looked at him. "Sure." He'd found himself. It was always the same story. He thought he'd do things differently, but in the end, he always fell back into the same patterns. He wasn't a man of conviction, not a man of progress. But I wouldn't tell him that. Maybe he needed this. Maybe he needed to fail again to figure out how to move forward. Why are you telling me this? I asked. I didn't feel angry, just tired. What was I supposed to do with this information? Had I ever really helped him? Or was I just the older brother who listened, the one who was always expected to be patient? Because I want you to understand, he said, as if it were my problem. I want you to approve, to get it. Maybe I'm not the man you thought I was, but I'm trying. I really am. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt something different. Not pity, not frustration, but something I hadn't expected. Doubt. Was this really my problem? Had I ever truly helped him? Was I the brother he needed, or was I just someone who let him fail over and over? Daniel sat there, waiting for something, an answer, maybe, or understanding. But I didn't give it to him. I said nothing. Eventually, he stood up. I should go, he said. Thanks for listening. And then he left. The door closed softly behind him, and I sat there. It was exactly what I'd expected. He hadn't stuck with it, hadn't changed. But maybe it wasn't my job to save him. Maybe this was how he needed to learn, by repeating the same mistakes. When Emma came home, she asked if everything was okay. Yeah, I said. He's gone. The rest of the evening was just like always. Emma and I had dinner together, talked a little about work and neighbors. Nothing special. And yet, I felt a small shift inside me. Maybe it was the truth I didn't want to admit, that I was just as stuck as Daniel, living a life I didn't really want. But there was nothing I could do about it. Not today. Not on my birthday.